When I sat down to start editing this video together, which is going to be about the Aputure 120D Mark II and several ways to light yourself, which you already know, you can read, you've seen the title, I looked at some of the footage and realized that my hair was getting kind of long and it was time for me to go get a haircut. But it was also about 8 o'clock at night. And I decided I have a pair of hair clippers. I already have the tools, I should be able to use them and give myself a haircut. So I set up my camera and monitor so I could see myself wirelessly, and I started to cut my hair. So after a little while of cutting my own hair, I was reminded, well, anyone can go buy tools and turn them on or use them. It might take a little bit of time and experience, or at least a little bit of research to understand how to use them well. And in my particular case, well, it may look like I have a pretty trendy haircut, and it's nice and even on one spot right here. One side is not like the other. And it reminds me of the time that I decided to start my own YouTube channel. I owned a camera and I thought, you know, I want to make videos. I can turn the camera on and make videos, no problem. But I didn't have any experience making videos, and I didn't have any experience with lights. And so it took me a long time to learn how to make my videos look halfway decent or even look good. Maybe after watching this video, you'll have a few ideas of how to use your tools a little bit better, or at least in a way that makes your videos look good. Anyways, I went over to my friend Jason's house.
Actually, you should say, was my house.
Oh yeah,
I was born and I grew up in this house.
I did. So I grew up, I wasn't born in this house.
No.
I was born in Oklahoma. But I did live in this house for 2 years before we moved 2 houses down. And then Jason moved into this house. And now he's gonna try and set up a YouTube studio. And he brought me over to help him figure out his lighting.
Gotta get the best.
The first thing we need to figure out is what light stand we're gonna use. And there are light stands that you can get for like 25 bucks off of Amazon. And if you're just carrying a single light straight up and you're on a budget, this will work. But as soon as you start adding any weight or modifiers, then you're gonna run into trouble, which is why I always recommend a C-stand if you ever wanna do some serious lighting. It's a more versatile tool. This little dog is following us around. It's like
Trini.
Half the size of my hand. It's Trini. Does Trini have an Instagram? Oh,
Trini,
there's
Trini.
The star.
And there's Flo. Flo is even better. When you weigh less than 3 pounds, you can go anywhere you want.
Think she'll pee on it? So this is our before shot, and this is kind of the setup he's gonna have, and we're gonna try to make this look better. The Aputure 120D Mark II, that'll come with a reflector. And that's fine for just the light stand, but I think the easiest way to get some quick use out of it is lighting setup number 1, and that is gonna be bouncing it straight off the ceiling. So just turn it up, point it straight up, and then kind of get it closer to the ceiling a little bit. And we'll have to turn that fan off because we can see that your face is like flashing right now. And we'll probably want to close the blinds and turn off these incandescent lights we have up there. First setup with the 120D, just bounced off the ceiling, nothing else. I think it looks a lot better already.
Definitely.
The next thing I see a lot of people do is they'll immediately watch a bunch of videos on YouTube of how to make their lighting look nicer, and everyone tells you get a softbox. Now what I like about Aputure's lights and Bowen's mount accessories is you don't necessarily need to use Aputure accessories to work with these lights. Anyways, this is a super cheap parabolic softbox I picked up, and let's put it on there. Oh, and a grid, and I'll show you the difference that makes. Alright, now, so before we throw in the softbox, I just kind of put the light straight up facing us, so we've got a really hard light coming over him. Hard light's really popular for stuff like Danny Trejo, you know, the guy with like all the wrinkles on his face. I've heard that it's not a good idea to use a soft light for that guy because you want to get all the texture on his face. That's kind of one of his characteristics.
That and great tacos from Trejo's Tacos.
I've never been there. Where is that?
Oh, there's a bunch. He's got a chain of them in LA now.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to eat some of
Trejo's
his tacos.
Tacos.
So this is what I'm talking about with C-stands and light stands. There's this cheap Amazon light stand now with this giant parabolic softbox on it is pretty much about to buckle here, and you know, a simple bump would make it fall over. that's when you probably want to start investing in the C-stands. So this is what our second setup kind of looks like so far. The C-stand, you always want to have the long leg pointing towards where the weight is. So we got that there. Have a seat, Jason. And so this is the parabolic softbox with the 2 layers of diffusion and no grid or anything. So the light is kind of spilling everywhere, but it's a real easy way to light everything up. Just throw the softbox on there, call it a day.
Looks good.
And now we're gonna throw on a grid and show you what that looks like. So this is Aputure's, one of Aputure's newest products. They just kind of announced it a couple days ago. This is their spotlight mount. It is essentially a Leco or a stage light meant for casting a hard light really far away. If you don't want to have a light, right next to you, you can use this to put the light somewhere else. You can also use it for backgrounds and stuff, but what we're going to use it for is for a key light. So we put that on the C-stand. And this is something I would definitely not recommend using one of those cheap light stands for, because it's pretty heavy.
Yeah, that might hurt.
Knocking it over would probably suck a lot. And then
would this be overkill
click
for a
it on.
small room or not?
It could be overkill for a small room, but it could not be. It depends. Because you're really cautious about sound. We got the spotlight mount on, and we actually have it outside of the room over there.
In the hallway.
So we've got it way over here now. So suppose you had a really loud light or something and you didn't want it in your space. Well, we got this iris tool here, which, close your eyes, Jason. You can set how big we want the light source to be. Say we want it like that. And we just take our 5-lumen reflector apart, and it's usually got this disc that's like kind of translucent in it. Put it right there. Then we have a soft light for Jason.
Nice.
That looks pretty cool, huh?
Very cool.
All right, let's put this on the tripod, see how it looks.
And that's called that's just a reflector.
This is just a 5-lumen reflector. It's a cheap piece of, $6 thing. All right, and so now what I've done is I've taken the spotlight mount and just kind of replaced the light up there with it, because it's so directional and it's so controllable that you can just kind of determine how much light you want to go places. So I've simulated the overhead fan light, but instead of the incandescent house lighting, I used a high quality video light to get a nice kind of my light is turned on look.
So you're lighting the light.
Yeah, you're lighting the light, but with light that you want to use instead of light that you don't want to use.
Looks good.
So now we have just the light, kind of up and behind him for another ominous kind of look. And again, coming back in with the reflector to bring in some fill. This would be interesting if you're like trying to look at computer screens or something, or simulate that look.
In your videos, are you lighting straight on?
So I usually light from the side, but I also have some kind of fill light usually.
Yeah, to come on this side.
Yeah. So what we've decided the best look was the softbox with the grid. And right now we're only lighting kind of the side of his face, but that's because I didn't want to light any of the background, really. We can move it a little bit more forward. This is the bowling P1. Something like this will help us make our backgrounds a little bit more interesting. I don't know, something to play with. All right, so this is our final setup here. We've got the softbox with the grid on it on the 120D2, just a few inches from his face. So we get a nice layer of separation there with the light just kind of close to his face, so the background's kind of dark. But then we threw the bowling P1 on there and made it blue, and that kind of, I think it makes it a little bit more interesting. So the bowling P1 over there, and then the 120D Mark II right here with the grid. And there we are.
Good stuff.
Now that we're back in my studio and I've already seen all the footage, Jason, if I have one more recommendation for you and maybe you have a little bit more budget, I would say also get yourself a rim light or a light that you can place above and out of the frame that you can point at you so you can kind of carve yourself out from the background a little bit more, kind of like what I do here with my Aputure 120D Mark II. And also now that you're here, I can tell you a little bit about how I've been using the 120D Mark II over the past couple months. I actually use a 120D Mark I as my key light, and I use the 120D Mark II as my backlight for a few very specific reasons and how the lights are semi-different. Now the 120D Mark II, it gets brighter at 100% than the 120D Mark I will get at 100%, and it can also dim from 0 to 10%, which is lower than the Aputure 120D Mark I can go, which it can only go down to 10%. So you can get incredibly dim and incredibly bright light out of the 120D Mark II. The reason I don't use it as my primary key light is after about 70% power on the 120D Mark II, the fans kick in to, their almost maximum speed. And while the Aputure 120D Mark II is incredibly quiet for the amount of light output that it has, and any fan noise that it does create is essentially negligible, you won't pick it up on any of your recordings, I'm still, OCD or maybe just very particular. I mean, I turn off everything that I possibly can. And if you're in a soundstage, you might feel the same way. I use the 120D Mark I because even at 100% power, it's still the quietest light that I think Aputure makes in their 120D series. So that's why I use the 120D Mark I as a key light. And I use the 120D Mark II as my hair light because it gets dim enough to use without completely blowing out my my outline here, because I think the 120D Mark I would still be too bright. It would look something kind of like this. To achieve this look, I need to use the 120D Mark II. A couple other things I like about the 120D Mark II over the Mark I, other than it can get brighter and dimmer, is it also has less cords dangling around, so you don't have, with the 120D Mark I, if you plug it into the wall and just leave it attached to a C-stand, that's fine, but if you're ever gonna move it around, you've got the extra power adapter hanging off of it that you have to deal with. The 120D Mark II also has some special effects built into it, but I don't really find myself ever using them. It is an interesting utility to have, and it is excellent if you're a filmmaker using, you need to simulate television or paparazzi or something, but I just don't really use those. Let me show you my exact setup over here with the Fresnel 2X attachment, which lets me kind of focus the beam into a very directional angle, and then also with their barn doors attachment, which lets me flag off part of that Fresnel focusing away from my lens element here so I don't get some nasty lens flare. Some people might think it's kind of cool to have that lens flare effect going across their lens, but I don't want it all the time. And if you have lens flare for just a talking headshot like this, it makes it, I don't think it makes it look as crisp. Anyways, that's how I've been using the 120D Mark II and of course the 120D Mark I. If you're new to my channel, feel free to hit the subscribe button. If you like this video, give me the thumbs up and all that YouTube stuff. Of course, if you want to get your own 120D Mark II or anything else I used, there are links in the description of this video, and I will see you in the next one.